listening to Seminary Dropout, and I'm your host, Shane Blackshear. Somewhere in between seminary and youth camp, it's Seminary Dropout. Let's go. Hey friend, welcome again to Seminary Dropout. We're going to be doing something a little bit different between now and the end of the year, and that is we're going to be doing kind of a best of series for a while. I'm going to bring up some really old episodes that probably most of you never heard, but should. So some of my favorites, some that were really popular, and some that I just think you should hear. I'm going to be re-editing a lot of them, and so the sound quality will be better than they were the first time around, because when I started this, I really didn't know what I was doing. So I hope you really enjoy them. And then later on this year, I'm going to have 4 episodes from my guest host. And I'm really, really excited about this. And I can't wait to share it with you. And so I hope you enjoy. Share it with your friends. And here you go. My guest today is best-selling author, renowned activist, sought-after speaker, and self-proclaimed recovering sinner. He writes and speaks around the world about peacemaking, social justice, and Jesus. He is the author of numerous books, including The Irresistible Revolution and Jesus for President. He's a visionary leader of the Simple Way in Philadelphia, and his work has been featured in Fox News, Esquire, Spin Magazine, The Wall Street Journal, NPR, and CNN. And of course, we probably don't need this introduction because I think my listeners will probably know exactly who you are. Shane Claiborne, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Well, it's great to be here. You named all them other places, but this is the most significant, your podcast, man. So thanks for having me.
Well, I'm just so excited about it. So the book was released yesterday, correct?
Yeah, it sure was. Officially. I've had a copy a little longer than that, but yeah, we're so thrilled it's getting out there and creating some good conversation.
I noticed, the format of the book is really, I almost feel like we're sitting in on a conversation between you and Tony. What made you guys decide to go with a format like that?
Well, we believe in dialogue, and every book. I wrote my first book in 2006, but every book since then I've written with somebody else, and that's the part of what I really believe is that we kind of have stronger voices together than on our own, and doesn't mean we all need to agree on everything, but we can model civil discourse and talk about real stuff. And so this book with Tony is it's been awesome. It's a conversation, cross generations, and old Baptist preacher and young fella, and he doesn't have any hair, and I got a lot, and we just had a great conversation. We're talking about everything from theology to lifestyle to politics, and but really at the end of the day, what we had in common and what is the framework for the conversation is this idea of what if Jesus really meant the stuff he said, and what if the words of Jesus and the life and teaching of Jesus were the model for our lives? How would the world look different?
It's so refreshing because I feel like too often, even from the Christian world, even from pastors and church leaders, when they speak on these things, they're too many times I feel like just kind of an echo of secular conservatives or liberals. It's just kind of an echo of whatever the world says about those things on either side. And so it's so refreshing to hear you and Tony take those things and really look at them through the lens of Jesus and his life.
Well, we're not interested in people being more Republican or more Democrat, but more Christ-like, and that's one of the places we begin is with lament. That Christians aren't always known for the things that Christ was known for, and in fact, the Barna Research Group asked young non-Christians what comes to mind when they hear the word Christian, and the top 3 answers were anti-gay, judgmental, and hypocritical. Yeah. And the rest of the list wasn't much better than those. And you look at those things, you go, my gosh, how is it that we Christians have become have come to look so unlike Christ? And how is it that we've become often known more for what we're against than what we're for? More for who we've excluded than who we've embraced. When Jesus said, "They'll know you're Christians by your love," so we want to be known by our love, and that we want to be known for a Christianity that looks like Christ. There's a great line Gandhi had, actually, that I kind of stole. What if Jesus meant the stuff he said? Is Gandhi at one point, he said, "Well, what do you think about Christianity?" And he said, "I love Jesus. I just wish the Christians took him more seriously."
Yeah,
because if you read the Sermon on the Mount and these things, and you just go, "Wow, that's not the kind of things that we Christians have been known for." But it was Tony and I's ambition to provoke, imagination and thought, to think, well, what if we really did set ourselves to live as if Jesus meant the stuff he said?
Yeah, often I feel like I hear, people who are, believers who hear those stats that, what do you think when you think about Christians and that anti all things, and a lot of believers hear that and say, that's not really fair, and my gut reaction to that is, no, I think it really is fair. I think it's sadly accurate of kind of who we've been.
Well, the truth often is uncomfortable to us, but the fact is that study after study has shown that that Christians are not often known for things like the fruits of the Spirit, which are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness. We're known for very different things as an onlooking world looks on. So the things that are the fruits of the Spirit, the Beatitudes of Jesus, all this debate about, prayer in schools, all these things, you think like, well, is America a Christian nation? You're like, the real litmus test is, does it look like Jesus? And I love how Wendell Berry once said, we can print money that says, "In God we trust," but our economy continues to look like the 7 deadly sins. So, you can call anything Christian, but the question at the end of the day is that does it actually resemble Christ? Because that's why the early followers of Jesus began to be called Christians, was because they were little Christ. They were living in ways that reminded people of Christ, so that's the kind of Christianity that we hope to practice and to see again. Because there's all sorts of. Every religion has people that have distorted the best of our faith. Jewish, Muslim, Christian. We've all seen. No one kills like they kill in the name of God, and we've seen Christians do it, we've seen Muslims do it. I mean, some of the most atrocious crimes in history have been by Christian people that would proclaim to be Christians, that are holding the Bible in their hand, and then are doing terrible things like the Ku Klux Klan or Adolf Hitler. I mean, so many of these, they actually had the Bible in their hand, and it was a terrible, distorted theology. And bad theology gets people killed, and it breaks their heart. I think it breaks God's heart to be so badly misrepresented. And it's not that we're perfect, but we sure are saying, like, we want to point people towards Christ. And when folks are holding signs that say God hates fags, or burning the Quran, or whatever these things are, these are people that hijack the headlines with hatred.
Yeah.
And I think over and over there is a movement of folks that know deep down, Christian or not, they look at that and they go, that just doesn't feel like Jesus. There's something not quite right about that. And so that's where we want to point towards, is go, hey, give Jesus a chance. Let's let Jesus survive all the embarrassing things that we Christians have done in his name. So the real place to begin is with a posture of humility and confession and lament of the ways that we've gone wrong and the ways we continue to go wrong. So let's begin with the log in our own eye, and the best critique of what's wrong is the practice of something better. So the answer to bad theology isn't no theology, but it's good theology. The practice, the solution to bad Christianity isn't, no Christianity, but a practice of Christianity that does resemble Christ again.
You talk a lot about in the book about how we live such safe lives. And so I'm wondering if you'll talk about that a little bit, that we do live such safe and sanitary lives, and kind of, I often wonder, where do we get that? I think safety might be the number one Christian American idol that we have today. And when you look at the Bible, when you look at Jesus's life and even Paul, safety doesn't seem to be something that they're very concerned about. And so I know you mentioned that a little bit in the book, and even I watched the little, trailer for the book that you guys had, and you talked about that a little bit. So I wonder if you would speak to that some.
Oh, as you look at the world that we live in, I mean, we live in a world that is just obsessed with safety, and it's often held hostage to our fear, and we fortify our borders and build defense shields, and have so many locks on our houses and cars, and we're just in such we find ourselves held hostage, I think, to our own fear, and so Jesus comes to liberate us from that, I think, and if you want to find your life, and give it away, it's no wonder that you're not ready to be my disciple unless you're ready to come and die, and it's no wonder that people have a hard time believing in our talk of resurrection, and they balk at our idea that life is more powerful than death, because we live in such fear of death. And yet, the promise of resurrection is that we might get killed, but we'll rise again. And that allows you to live with a freedom and a winsomeness, like the lilies and the sparrows, with a sense of I don't need to stockpile for tomorrow and worry about the economy, And right. I've learned a lot of that from living among, poor and homeless folks. Like one of my neighbors, people were talking about the Wall Street and the recession, and one of my neighbors goes, no matter what happens on Wall Street, God is still good. And he said, and besides, my people have been in a recession for a couple 100 years, but God never left us. Wow. And so there's something to that ability to realize that all the stuff of earth, thieves can destroy, fires can burn up, rust can rot out, and moths can eat away. But what really lasts? And so that's what Jesus is constantly doing. And my mom, she had, bless her, I'm her only kid, and, she's been through a lot of anxiety over the years, I'm sure. And, when I went to Iraq during the war and the bombing, my mom was a little worried. But then she said, the more I pray, she said, the more I sense that God isn't calling you to be safe, and that God will be with you in the danger. And there's no more dangerous place. There's no more dangerous place for Christians to be than in comfort and safety, and insulated from the pain of the world. Because the very story of Jesus is about God leaving the comforts of heaven and joining the pain and the crud and the suffering here on earth. And so, I really believe that Christians at our core are called to move towards the suffering, towards the pain of the world, rather than just mirroring the pattern of suburban sprawl and of fear and things where you move away from neighborhoods where there's high crime, right, and there's people that don't look like us or whatever. We're always scared of what we don't know or what's unfamiliar. And yet, the very story of Jesus is about God moving into the neighborhood and God moving into a place where people said nothing good could come. So that's the pattern that compels us. And if we allow the story of Jesus to kind of infect our lives, it is an uncomfortable message. I love that old saying that the true gospel comforts the disturbed, but it disturbs the comfortable. And that's what I think Jesus really does to us. Is Jesus kind of messes with the things that we trust in, and the securities that we have and challenges us to live with more freedom that is found only in God, and all this other stuff is just sinking sand.
Well, I want to use something that you just mentioned there to kind of segue into the next question, which is you speak a lot about the idea of not hoarding up and not stockpiling and things of that nature. And so I kind of have a question that I've always wanted to ask you on kind of a practical question. Just a little bit about my background. At a different part of my life, I was a caseworker for the state and for a department called Adult Protective Services, working mostly with the elderly. And, often I would encounter elderly people in poverty who, not necessarily through any fault of their own, not because of laziness or anything like that, but they were in poverty because they had just never thought that they were going to live to the age that they were, and so their savings ran out before their life did. And so I'm just curious what you would say to that problem.
When Jesus is kind of inviting, even commanding us to sell what we have and give it to the poor and to live like the lilies and the sparrows and all these things, they can seem pretty impractical, and yet I think what Jesus was inviting us, really, especially the early Christians, what Jesus was daring them to discover was that there is an alternative security, or there's an alternative way of caring for one another other than just me and mine and stockpiling for tomorrow, enough stuff for, our retirement or our 401k or whatever. I mean, Jesus really, really challenges that. And in one place, Jesus says, here's a story for you. There's a guy that's built a barn to store up a bunch of stuff for later, and the barn's not big enough. So he says, man, I'll need to tear down this barn and build a bigger barn. And God just looks down and says, you fool, you don't even know if you're going to have tomorrow, what's going to happen to all your stuff when you die. So that idea, tomorrow's got enough worries of its own, don't worry about what you're going to eat or what you're going to wear. It's a huge thing. But as I look at it closely, and I've studied the early church, you get the sense that part of why Jesus sent the disciples out with no extra clothes and no extra food or, nothing at all was not so that they would just suffer in poverty and alone, but so that they would be dependent on hospitality and on community. So it put them in a place where they needed other people, and you go into a town and you knock on the door and folks will welcome you. And if they don't, then it'll be better for Sodom and Gomorrah than for those people. So it's like to put them in a place where they needed hospitality and they need to practice it. And this is before couchhopper.com, so this is but it's beautiful. And one of the early Christians said, I have no house, but we have homes everywhere we go. And what they discovered was this radical new economy where it's a contradiction to the pattern that we often see in our world, where I'm responsible for me and my family, and I'm going to hold up a bunch of money in a bank account. And there's another way of going, no, actually, we're going to take care of each other. And in the early church, it says everybody shared everything they had. No one claimed any of their possessions were their own. It says there were no needy persons among them, because people would bring their offerings and they would put them before the community and they'd share together. So it's that idea is this old commonwealth, common good idea, communal sharing that's rooted in love. So when we pray every day in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread, it is also going, I'm not going to pray for tomorrow's bread. I'm not going to just pray for my bread. We're praying that everyone would have enough for this day, their daily bread. And right now, that's not the case. And part of the reason that it's not the case is masses of people are living in poverty so that a handful of people can live however they wish. And I think that the growing disparity between the super rich and the super poor is very disturbing to Jesus and to God. And one of the very first scriptures in Exodus is, God pouring down bread from heaven. But God says, before they even have the Ten Commandments, God says, don't take more than your daily bread, or else there won't be enough for everybody. So I think that practice of simplicity and of sharing is at the very heart of God, the very heart of Jesus. And we've gone a long way from that, where 1% of the world is owning so much, while 99% of the world has very little or even not enough to scrape by.
I came across, this is a blogger that I read quite often, a Christian blogger, and she was just kind of confessing that sometimes that she felt guilty because her faith outwardly didn't look exactly like Shane Claiborne's, and the fact that she didn't sleep with the homeless and alongside the homeless and sell everything that she owned and things like that, and then talked about the responsibilities of raising children and having a full-time job and things that go along with that. And I'm wondering if that is a sentiment that you come across often as you travel and as you meet people, and what your response is to that.
Oh, I don't. I think it's funny because sometimes I hear people describe our life or my life, and I'm like, my life doesn't look like Shane Claiborne, and I think that at least in the way that people have it in their mind, and for me, the interest is not for people to be more like me, but for all of us to be more like Christ, and that's the point of our book, with the Red Letter Revolution, was Tony and I don't exactly do things the same way. I mean, I like to make clothes, so I make a lot of my own clothes. Tony's got like a sports, like a suit jacket that he's worn for like 30 years. I mean, he had it on when I was in college, and he got it from a thrift store. So I think I don't think that non-conformity to the patterns of the world, that doesn't mean uniformity. It doesn't mean that we're all going to do the same thing, but I think what we can do is say, we're not going to conform to the patterns where of this world where some people have so much more than me while others have less, or the patterns of violence or the patterns of exclusion. But what does that look like? Well, it looks different for each person. And, let me just share a story, because, thinking about our last question of people dying, old and alone, and people responding in different ways. One of my buddies that lives up the street, he's got 2 kids, and he and his wife and family, she was a social worker too, a lot like you, bro, and she was visiting one of her clients, and they're digging through her stuff as they're trying to move her into an elderly folks home, and she had Alzheimer's, and so they're packing her stuff up for her and helping her move on. And as they're packing it up, they see a little note she had written that essentially said, "Dear God, please don't let me die alone in an old folks home."
Oh my gosh.
And you read that, they're like, "Oh my gosh, what do we do?" Well, I mean, before long, they had adopted this old woman into their family, and they started living together. And that doesn't mean it all like, they lived happily ever after. There were days they wanted to rip their hair out or rip her hair out, or whatever. Right. And yet, like, one day, not a particularly hard day, they said, "We had no idea how long she would live," But like, in the end, they loved her well. And she died not in an old folks home, but with a family around her, telling stories about her life, holding her hand as she died. And that's what I think the community of God looks like. It doesn't look like everybody, just moving and sleeping on the streets or something. I think it looks like all of us saying, what does it mean to love my neighbor as myself? What does it mean to love my 90-year-old Alzheimer's, unrelated biologically client, as myself? How would I want to be treated if that was me? And in the end, I think we have so much imagination and freedom in the spirit that we don't need to feel like we've got to conform to one model of what it can look like to follow Jesus. You even look at two tax collectors in Scripture, Zacchaeus and Matthew, and they don't respond in the exact same way. One sells everything, the other sells half of everything, and pays people back 4 times what he had owed them. So they're different kinds of people because of Christ. But in the end, we're reorienting our life in light of Christ and in light of the pain and suffering of our neighbors around the world.
So I have some questions from listeners that I'd like to ask you. Melissa wants to know your thoughts on how to raise children of peace. How do you teach them about history and our current war? How do you teach them killing is bad while still helping them to be respectful to those in uniform? And hey, I'll say, how do we do those things?
Yeah, one of the things that we have to do, I think, is to be honest about what our history and what we're teaching kids. And in fact, on my Facebook page right now, I've got a post about Columbus Day, kind of saying let's be honest about what happened with Christopher Columbus, and without being anti-American or something like that. But let's be honest with our history. And there's a good book that's entitled "Lies My Teacher Told Me," and it kind of gets at that we're not teaching our kids real history. We're not always teaching our kids the right heroes and sheroes. So I think part of what we got to do is we got to say, as Christians, we have a different story than just the story of kings and presidents and nations and empires. We've got the story of what God's doing through history. So our heroes are not just the Christopher Columbuses and the Rockefellers, but our heroes are the heroes of compassion. Mother Teresa and Oscar Romero and St. Francis. And so I think we've got to teach our kids those things, and we shouldn't be scared of really hard conversations and frank dialogue, like can you follow Jesus and serve in the military? For me, I really believe that when Jesus said that we're to love our enemies, he meant we shouldn't kill them. And I see more and more young people that end up in the military, sometimes because of financial reasons. And one of my friends of Iraq, he said there's an economic draft in America that a lot of people don't know how they're going to go to college if they join the military, and then like him, find themselves in really, really difficult positions where he said he felt like he was trying to serve two masters. He was trying to serve Christ and trying to serve his country, and he felt like he said, I can't carry a cross in one hand and a gun in the other. So I think we got to really have those conversations with our kids, and that doesn't mean that we're villainizing soldiers or something like that. My friend who himself is a veteran from the Iraq War, he came back and he actually just wrote a book called Reborn on the 4th of July. And I love it because he's got a shirt that says "For God and Country," in that order. So he says, I'm a Christian first, an American second, and so what does it mean to pledge allegiance to Christ? So that's the kind of thing I think we've got to teach our kids, even if that's unpopular, But in the end, there's a reason that that soldier suicides are at one a day. That are often there's more people dying from suicide than from combat. And part of that is because we are not teaching our kids, you're not born to kill. You're born to Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they're the children of God." So let's figure out how people can live into the vocation that God has for them.
Man, that's so good. I feel like, we could sit and talk about that for hours. Okay, next question. This question is actually from my wife, and she asked the question about the balance of care for others and self-care.
I had a friend who I respect so much because he's integrated those really well. And he said, some people need to hear, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And other people need to hear, love yourself as you love your neighbor. Because without a doubt, there are some folks that end up pouring themselves out so much that we don't take care of our own souls, or our own bodies, or sustain ourselves, and practice things like a Sabbath and do things with joy. And so I think that we've got to do this in community too, to where we don't feel like we're the Lone Ranger saviors and messiahs of the world. The Messiah's already come, and we're not him. And so that allows us to live with a little bit more freedom, I think, to go, I'm joining God's work, but in the end, it is God's work, and the burdens of the world aren't on my shoulders alone. And so when we do that in community, it gives you, as the scriptures say, bear one another's burdens. You come home and you can say, man, I had a really crappy day. Danny's dad beat him up again, and I've been really carrying that, and you got other people that carry that with you, and also everybody's imagination trying to figure out how can we keep that from happening again. So I think, just as many hands make for light work, many shoulders make the burdens a little lighter. So we've got to do things that not just get rid of bad habits, but we've got to create some holy habits too, that keep rejuvenating and refreshing our soul. And I think Jesus was really good at that, at running off to the mountain and, turning water into wine to keep the party going. And, I think Jesus knew how to laugh and to love, and wasn't just this kind of like social justice people, man. They can be so serious, and so I think if we can't laugh a little bit, then the devil's already won.
Well, Shane, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Remember, you can find all the show notes for this show and all shows at shaneblackshear.com. Oh, and hey, have you ever thought about starting your very own podcast? I bet you have. And I think you should do it. In fact, I've created a course just for you to teach you everything that I've learned over the last couple of years producing Seminary Dropout. So if you're interested in podcasting and want to learn how, go check out my course. You can go there by typing in podcastingforeveryone.org. And you can get a special discount by typing in the discount code Seminary Dropout, all one word. That'll give you 25% off. So go check it out. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay. Thanks to those that left ratings and reviews on iTunes this week. Remember, that keeps the show front and center. Also, remember, you can find me on Twitter at beardonabike. That's at beardonabike. Also, I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/ShaneBlackshear123. And remember that Seminary Dropout is listener supported. You can visit supportseminarydropout.com and press Become a Patron. Remember, this music you're listening to right now is by D.L. Rossi. You can find him online on iTunes and at dlrossi.com. All right, thanks again for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Love you. Take care.
Yeah, my best. I always seem to bring that, but